Raised in a religious household, Neil was expected to remain celibate until he turned 18. But as he was preparing for an important ceremony, he uncovered that his parents had offered him as a human sacrifice in order to save themselves. Terrified, Neil runs away with his best friend and sets out on a journey to have his virginity taken away before sunrise. As Neil strides through the school hallway, he casts his eyes over the female students while unconsciously murmuring the other names of the Prince of Darkness. Meanwhile, Neil is distractedly organizing his locker while fearful thoughts of the future drift through his mind. With no time to waste, he knows he must begin his quest to find someone to make him a man. But, who will grant his wish? Matt's outgoing personality was on full display when he proudly presented the brightly colored clothing he had chosen to attract women. His reserved best friend was encouraged by Matt to use his card tricks to similarly catch the attention of the ladies. In an instant, Matt's gaze was drawn to Cheryl, the popular girl in school, and without hesitation, he grabbed her. Matt asked his friend to demonstrate his card trick skills to Cheryl, and the magician asked her to select a card and tear it up before handing it back to him. To Cheryl's surprise, however, after he showed her the wrong card, the magician revealed he was able to restore the card to its original state. Cheryl was beginning to turn away unimpressed, but the timid guy had one last trick to show her. He asked her to look under her top, and to her amazement, she found the card she had chosen. Cheryl was amazed and immediately invited Neil and Matt to the party she was throwing the following weekend. Unfortunately, Neil had to decline the invitation due to a religious ceremony he had to attend at church, while Matt desperately tried to understand how Neil had pulled off the trick. Denise urgently warned the team, telling Neil to hide from Kent, Cheryl's boyfriend. After learning that Neil performed a magic trick on her, they all ran away. Matt, Neil's best friend, pushed him into a janitor's closet in their haste. As they ran inside, Neil accidentally knocked over a bottle of liquid soap, covering his pants in a white fluid. Everyone was scared, but they managed to stay hidden until the danger had passed. When Kent opened the door, he was met with a scene that filled him with amusement. Neil was scrubbing a stain off the floor and Kent couldn't help but snicker. At the sight, he made sure to draw everyone's attention to the embarrassed-looking Neil as the group prepared for church. Neil and Matt donned their robes and walked into the worship hall, where the room was filled with chants glorifying Lucifer. Despite Neil's momentary mistake, Kent couldn't help but be proud of him for joining the congregation. The sermon had been underway at the cult with the leaders, Sheldon and Mary, preaching to their congregation. Meanwhile, the friends of Neil were goofing off and distracting the other members. Without warning, a woman entered the hall, bringing with her a white goat as an offering. The crowd watched as the preachers accepted the offering, only to take its life in the end. When the congregation had left, Neil was left to face the disappointment of his parents, Gary and Shelley, who had seen the entire incident. During the confrontation, Neil tried to shift the blame onto his best friend Matt, who had been the instigator of the whole situation. But before the confrontation could continue any further, Sheldon and Mary approached Neil and his parents to follow up on their preparations for the upcoming ceremony. It was their subtle way of testing Neil's readiness for the cult and its upcoming rituals. Gary and Shelley were in the underground church, where the leaders briefed them on the plan to sacrifice their son Neil on his 18th birthday. Though Neil's mom wanted them to explain the ceremony to Neil, Gary refused out of fear it would frighten him and Matt. On the day of the sacrifice, the family gathered for a small celebration. However, when Neil attempted to open up about a girl, Gary was suspicious and questioned him if they had grown intimate. Neil insisted that he was still chaste. The father of the family was very concerned and reminded his son of his purpose and his faith. He implored him to focus on his religion and values. When the son left to use the restroom, his wife Shelley tried to convince her husband Gary to tell their son the truth, but Gary still refused. While the family sat in the living room of the church, Neil was diligently memorizing the many names of Lucifer. His mother, proud of her son's diligence, sat next to him and gave him a big hug. The family was together in a place of faith and hope, but questions of truth and honesty weighed heavily on their hearts. Matt was filled with anticipation as he saw his friend, ready to break his celibacy vow in an ancient ritual. At Sheldon and Mary's command, all assembled in the worship hall and put away their phones and tablets. As soon as Sheldon and Mary kneeled on the sacrificial table before them, the ceremony began with the worshippers chanting in tribute to the Prince of Darkness. But Matt grew suspicious upon hearing the phrase, "sacrificial lamb," as the leader drew his ornate blade, and Matt leapt into action to save his friend's life. As the friends ran away, Sheldon panicked, mentioning that the ritual must not be interrupted. He gave an order to Matt's father, Paul, a police officer, along with cult members Brad and Colette, to track down Neil and bring him back. With a disappointed look in his eyes, Sheldon warned Neil's parents that they would be excommunicated if their son did not return before sunrise. If the ritual was not performed, it would lead to the return of the one they all feared the most, Jesus Christ. In the meantime, Neil's parents were left to worry about their son's safety and what the consequences might be if he didn't return in time. Neil had just made it to Neil's house with Matt, his friend who had helped him escape. The young man was scared and wanted to call the police, but Matt stopped him. He knew that if he did, his father and the police department, which was largely made up of church members, would be alerted and the pair would be caught. Matt desperately tried to calm Neil down and reassure him that they would find another way out of their predicament. Despite his fear, Neil listened and eventually agreed to not phone the police. Together, they came up with a plan to get them out of their current situation without alerting the authorities. Matt grabbed the phone in a panicked attempt to distract the cops and inadvertently revealed their location just as they were about to leave the house. Neil took out his phone to call a cab, and as they rushed to Denise's place, he left the phone behind as a clue for Paul. On their way, Neil planned to be honest with Denise and explained that his life would only be saved if they performed the deed together. He was determined to keep his best friend from being sacrificed, so he vowed to do whatever it took to make sure they both made it out alive. Neil had an interesting suggestion for Denise: keep it a secret, just like Matt did when he performed card tricks in her house. Although Denise was initially dismayed, Neil tried to explain that he needed to make love to her in order to protect himself from being sacrificed at Lucifer's altar. Neil knew that with each passing day, the danger of this sacrifice was rising, and he wanted to make sure he was safe before it happened. He was pleading with her to consider his proposal, and hoped that she would understand that this was for his safety. Denise was astounded and couldn't believe that Matt would try such an outlandish excuse to get her attention. The sound of a car approaching in the distance revealed that their pursuers were close. Matt quickly stepped outside to keep watch as Denise waited inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Colette and Brad arrived at Denise's house, inquiring if she had seen Neil. Denise informed them that he had been there earlier, but had since left for a party at Cheryl's. Upon hearing the news, Colette and Brad felt a sense of alarm. They needed to find Neil before he left or they would be stranded. Quickly, they made their way towards Cheryl's house, hoping to catch him before he left. As they ran, they prayed he was still there. Cheryl welcomed the couple into her home and guided them to the location of the party. Brad briefly mentioned their worship of Colt and the realization that Neil's warning about the sacrifice had been true. Determined to make sure everyone was warned, Cheryl decided to go to the party. Neil was uncertain about entering the house, but Cheryl reassured him that it was necessary. Together, they ventured inside, ready to face whatever awaited them. Matt knew he only had a short window of time before sunrise to make a connection. He introduced Neil to the guests at the house party, but they continued to ridicule him for what happened in the janitor's closet. Despite his anxiety, Neil decided to try a drink, but it made him feel sick and he had to rush to the bathroom. Cheryl was still there, and she could tell Matt was desperate. She offered to give him the chance he had been searching for and, with the sun soon to rise, they made an intimate connection before the night ended. Neil was feeling embarrassed when the partygoers outside the door mocked him for what they thought was a self-gratifying act. However, instead of running away or hiding in the bathroom, Neil confidently stepped out and pushed the bully, Can't, off the table. He then proceeded to perform his first magic trick, sending confetti towards the bully's face. For his second trick, the magician asked for a volunteer. Everyone immediately suggested Kant, who was forced to pick a card and show it to everyone. Unfortunately, the guests and volunteers confirmed that it was the wrong card. Neil, however, was still proud of himself for confidently performing his magic tricks in front of his peers and the bully. The trickster's performance was met with rapturous applause, as the audience was delighted to find a surprise firework in the volunteer's pocket. Cheryl was astounded and proposed that she and Neil find a more intimate place to be alone. Before they could make a move, Denise entered the house to search for Neil and Matt. She seemed relieved to find them, however, her tired expression suggested that she had been worried about where they had gone. Colette sought out her inebriated friend Matt to discover Neil's location. Matt, charmed by Colette's cunning, told her that Neil was likely upstairs making love. Worried, Colette quickly hastened to the room to find him, only to discover Neil in an intimate moment with Cheryl. Denise interrupted the two, warning them that the church members had infiltrated the festivities. Colette and Brad were making their way up the stairs when Neil had the ingenious idea to draw attention away from them by kissing Colette's knees. Seeing the pursuit, the philosopher Denise offered to help, distracting the pursuer while Neil and Matt raced off. Matt and Neil then attempted to steal a car, only for the intoxicated Matt to crash it into the car behind them. Colette saw them, but the friends managed to flee the scene. Brad and Colette responded by kidnapping Denise, joining Matt and Neil in pursuit. With Neil at the wheel of the stolen car, the group suddenly found themselves running out of gas. With no other option, they had to push the car to the nearest gas station. Luck was on their side, and they were able to make their escape. Sheldon, Mary, and Neil's parents were eagerly awaiting an update. The leader of the church mentioned that if Neil failed to appear, they would have to find an alternate offering. So, Neil and Matt decided to drive into the city to find a courtesan. They were lucky enough to come across Ashley, who directed them to a nearby brothel. At the reception, they were asked if they would like someone specific and they chose Ashley. However, the blonde courtesan insisted on taking Matt first, despite the friend's insistence that Neil should go first. When it was finally Neil's turn, he noticed a pentagram tattoo on the back of Ashley's neck, indicating that she was a member of the church. It was at this moment that Neil realized he had made a grave mistake. Neil was desperately trying to follow Denise down the hallway of the brothel, but his plans were abruptly interrupted when Paul appeared and began chasing him. Neil quickly put on a show and managed to draw attention to himself, prompting people to pour out of their rooms and block the policeman's way to the exit. Meanwhile, Matt and Denise were able to locate a vehicle and used it to create a distraction for the people chasing Neil. Matt made his way out of the truck and was mistaken for his friend, leading the pursuers away as Neil slipped away safely. Neil and Denise were on the run, trying to escape from Paul. As they drove, Denise confessed her feelings for Neil, who shared the same sentiment. Neil pulled the truck over in an alleyway, hoping they could have some time alone. However, before they could act on their feelings, Paul appeared, catching them in the act. He was outraged that Neil had broken his promise of purity and he had them both dragged into a van. Their hands were tied behind their backs, so they were helpless in the face of their captor. The friends were then taken back to the church to finish the ritual and Paul locked them up in a cell with a goat. It was then that Matt confessed that he had cried during his intimate encounter with a courtesan. Neil offered his comfort and support, understanding better than anyone what his friend was going through. After Matt and Colette reconcile their differences, Matt presents the idea that they should perform the task of sacrificing themselves in order to save his life. At first, Colette is hesitant to accept this plan, but eventually agrees. She then leaves Brad in the lobby to watch the nice while she goes and takes the candelabra to knock the man out. Upon returning to the cell, Paul and another member find Matt and Neil on the verge of completing the task. The cop quickly opens the cage and takes Neil away to be sacrificed in the hall. Matt is left behind in the cell, desperate and devastated, but with a newfound sense of understanding of how important life is and the power of love. Minutes later, terror and chaos fill the room as smoke rises from the burning drapes. Denise had managed to infiltrate the cult members' ceremony and had thrown the candelabra to ignite the curtains. The cloaked worshippers had initially taken the flames as a sign from their god, but the leader soon realized the fire was real. As the flames spread, the members panicked and ran out of the burning area, leaving Neil still restrained to the sacrificial table. Denise, not wanting to lose this chance, quickly ran over and untied Neil, and the two of them were able to escape before the building was consumed by the raging fire. Days later, Neil showed his gratitude to Denise in a creative and thoughtful way. He performed a magical trick and then presented her with a video game cartridge as a token of his appreciation. The momentous event showed Neil's parents the power of their faith. Shelley reminded him that Jesus loved him, and Gary reminded him that Jesus sacrificed his life for Neil's sins. The couple was forever changed by the power of their faith, and the congregation was witness to the power of their love. Neil and Matt had just exited the church when Neil invited his friend Matt to hang out. Matt, with a cheeky smirk, declined, telling Neil that he had Bible study with the three ladies he had just left with. If you are looking for more videos like this one, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. A like on the video would also be greatly appreciated and would help the channel out. Thank you for watching.